all, welcome you all to another workshop brought to you by Ability. This is Revati and I'll be your host for today. Hope all of you are doing fine and are keeping safe. It's lovely to have you all here with us today. In our today's workshop, we'll be focusing on the heart of an educator. In this, you will learn about the importance of developing a positive mindset and learn techniques that will transform your journey, your teaching journey. Let me now introduce you all to our resource speaker for today. Dr. Amba Sethi is a counseling psychologist and a master trainer. She has been working in the field of mental health for over 25 years with a master's degree and a PhD in psychology. She is a counselor, meditation teacher, trainer, and workshop conductor. She is also a master trainer for prevention of child abuse for the state of Chhattisgarh and a trainer for Chhattisgarh Prahashan Academy and Police Training School. She has been extensively working in the field of stress management, emotional intelligence, parenting, mental health, and metacognition. Who better than her to take us through the importance of developing right mindset as an educator? Before I hand over the podium to her, I would like to inform all the participants that the current session would be for 2 hours. The session would begin with a presentation followed by a Q&A discussion. During the presentation, while the speaker is sharing her knowledge, we would be switching the chat to the host and panelist mode so that we can all focus on the speaker sharing. Wish you all a happy learning, and I hand over the podium to you, ma'am, to broaden our understanding and develop more positive mindset as educators to help our children in the school setup.
Thank you, Revati. Thank you, Ability. And I will just a very warm welcome to all the members. And please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am. We're able to see
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So a very warm welcome to all the people who have joined and also to those who will be watching this video later on. And I really don't, without wasting any time, I want to straight get on to the topic. And this topic is very close to my heart, as I've been working in a school in Raipur, in Delhi Public School for many years now. And I understand the importance of how an educator, how a teacher can have a tremendous impact on the students. And this impact is really, really very important for how the child views himself. Right? It is so important that I think it is one of the most important things in the journey of, growing up, in the process of getting educated. So moving on a little bit about what you all have already been learning. You've had sessions, Ability has had sessions on child development and core skills building. They've had sessions on unique special needs and their challenges and the importance of assessment and effective intervention. And the topic for our today, the heart of a teacher, the heart of an educator, actually tells us about the importance of the right mindset as a teacher, the do's and don'ts, the specific skills, and the power of a teacher. And moving ahead, this is the very important part, because, giving credits is like giving gratitude from the person whom I have learned. And he has been an inspiration. He was a psychotherapist, Dr. Hemji Genot, and this presentation is based on his work, which is very close to my heart. To start with, I would tell all the teachers here and even all the parents, because parents are also somewhere teachers to their children, don't be a teacher, be a human being who is a teacher. This is so important because it's teacher we become later on, but human beings we are first. And we all need to, raise our children as amazing human beings, as good human beings. So who can raise a good human being? Only one who himself is a great human being, one who believes in himself. And we know all that, with the computer age, with the technology, we know that many teaching problems are going to be solved in the next few decades. There will be new learning environment, new means of instruction, but there is always one very, very important thing. One function cannot be taken away from the teacher, will always remain with the teacher. That is to create the emotional climate for learning, whether the children who are actually, coming to schools, those children who are interested in learning, whether they are actually motivated to learn, whether they love their learning, that function is always going to remain with the teacher. No machine, however sophisticated, can do this job. And that is why, the heart of a teacher, the heart of an educator is a very important part. It's one of the most important parts of a teacher. And now, over a few years, we've seen that, how I want the educators basically to view themselves, right? Because before the educators are able to create an emotional climate for learning, how they view themselves, what is the way they have, what opinion they have of themselves is actually going to impact. So that is why each and every educator who's present here, I want you all to visualize yourself as creators with unlimited potential. This is a part of self-talk, right? What is self-talk? Something which I go on and on saying to myself. Suppose I keep telling myself, hey, I have unlimited potential. Of course, I can make a difference in the life of this child. I will be more motivated to, I will be more inspired to make a difference, right? And if I think that, oh my God, I have limited resources, I can't do much, that itself will work as a hindrance. So please, all the teachers present here, believe that you are creators with unlimited potential. You have to have belief in yourself, because in its absence, if you don't have that belief, what is going to happen? You will be susceptible to the tug of perfectionism. You'll want, okay, I want my students to be perfect. I want them to perform very well. I want them to have great grades. And if you're not able to get that, you may start, criticizing yourself. You may start indulging in negativity, burnout. All of these things weaken the self. So believe in yourself, believe that you have unlimited potential. When you start with that belief, you're bound to make a difference. You are naturally going to create an emotional climate where kids will be happy learning, right? So what is your core, right? What are your beliefs? Do you know how much power you wield over children's? How important you are in a child's life? So that is why your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions are extremely important, because they will be the ones, who will be the kind of things you're talking to the children, the way your body language is, the way you're behaving to the children, all is going to be a reflection of what your beliefs are. And each and every teacher, you are doing an amazing job. You are spreading knowledge, So please have utmost respect for the self. There is a part inside you. It is that innermost self, that innermost core. Respect yourself. Don't wait for others to come and respect you, for your administrators to come and appreciate you. Like, we say self-love, love precedes, or self-care precedes other care and other love. That ways, respect yourself for being or doing this amazing job of being a teacher, right? And when your thoughts, decisions are generated from this place, it is at that time you will become an unconditional source of support, inspiration, and you'll be able to forge that connection. You'll be able to connect with the heart of a child. So that is why, just pat your own backs, right? Love yourself for doing an amazing job. Love yourself for being a teacher. Feel that gratitude inside you, that how much knowledge and how much of awareness you're spreading in your students, So just love and respect yourself right at the beginning, because to truly empower another individual, you must first empower yourself. So really a request to all the teachers, which this request is from my heart, that don't wait for others to come and appreciate your work. Don't wait for others to come and tell you that you're doing great work. Believe that you are doing great work. Believe that you are truly powerful. Because when you come from that place of feeling empowered, you will be able to, spread that feeling. You will be able to encourage your own students to feel empowered and to make them actually believe that each and every one of us is a powerful individual. We don't know that inside us, we have all those resources, to empower ourselves. So moving on, The objective, moving on to the objective, this objective is, if you see, it says in very few lines, a very wide areas are there, which we have to cover. So how do we function in a classroom humanely as well as effectively? How to discipline without humiliating, how to criticize without destroying self-worth, how to praise without judging, how to express anger without hurting, how to acknowledge and not argue with feelings, how to respond so that children can learn to trust their inner reality and develop self-confidence. So you see that we have a beautiful objective in hand, and this will, so many things will be going forward in the workshop and learning how to achieve all these goals. And very important, above all, do no damage, right? You may not make many gains, but we have to minimize losses. And in our attempt to get children to behave in a way that is conducive to learning, we do not damage them psychologically. We don't want our children to be damaged, right? So we don't talk in a way that will, create anger in them, enrage them, which will basically diminish their self-confidence or inflict hurt upon them and cause them to lose faith in their competence and ability. So see, what we have to do is, there will be times that you may not be able to make the gains which you want to, right? You may think, oh my God, I want this child to learn this much, and he's not learning. But at that time, we can at least minimize losses instead of damaging a child by getting angry, by name calling. We are going to go through all of that later. So children, why this happens, to understand this, that children, they are very programmable, they are very vulnerable. What happens is that children, see themselves through the eyes of a teacher, through the eyes of a parent. And suppose a teacher says, you are doomed, you're horrible, you can't do anything in life. Now that word will make such a tremendous impact on the child that the child may lose all self-confidence in his own self. So you imagine how powerful you are, that every word you speak, children are like wet cement. Every word a teacher speaks, and even a parent for that matter, it leaves an impact. So even in zest, what you say to the children, can have very serious consequences in them. Because why? They are developing a self-image. They don't know who they are. When a child is born, they don't have any self-image. So where do children develop this self-image from? They develop this self-image of who they are from what the teachers and the parents say to them. And that is why what we speak, and all these significant adults, actually, it's not only the parent, it's not only the teacher, it is all these significant adults in a child's life. Whatever they say, even in zest, can have really serious consequences, because they will believe you, because they trust you. And that is why what you say about them is, for them, it is the truth. It makes a part of their self-image, and they start believing that is who they are. That is why, my dear teachers, parents, whoever is watching this program, be very careful. Be very careful how you speak to your children, how you communicate to your children. And now we have come across this theme of despair. We know that there is a lot of dissatisfaction, there's a lot of disappointment and despair in teachers. And very often teachers are losing faith, they are giving up hope. Some are clamoring for reform. Some, those who are, very radical or more radical, they want to change the system. And the more conservative will simply pursue palliatives, because we can understand there's a lot of things a teacher has to do, a lot of pressure on the teacher, right? And meanwhile, dealing with all these things, the life in the classroom marches on. There are children to teach, there are parents to appease, there are principals to account to, and they all make demands on the teacher's time and energy. And understanding this fact, what we are going to learn in today's workshop are basically skills. Because what I want you to very, very clearly understand, that there is a difference between skills. It is skills actually which save us. We all know in theory, right? Don't we all know that children need to be loved? We need to be courteous with children. We need to, inspire children. We need to motivate children, right? In theory, We know all that. Children need to be acknowledged, children need to be accepted, but do we know how to do that? And that is the problem, that when crucial problems appear, the philosophies disappear. A philosophy or a theory is not going to help you at that moment. So if a man is sinking, if he knows the theory about, how you have to swim, is it relevant? He actually has to practice the skill of swimming. So either he knows how to swim or he drowns. That is the reason why here I have taken up subtle examples, so that you develop these skills. You not only know the theory behind them, but you also know how we have to develop these skills. It is like, what happens is that when we are developing skills, initially we have to be very conscious and aware. When I'm really conscious and aware, only then can I start learning. Like, for example, somebody is learning how to drive, right? Initially, in the few days, what does he do? He's, carefully holding the the gears and the steering wheel, and he's carefully pressing his whether it's the brake, whether it's the clutch. So when we are learning a skill, we really have to be very conscious, we have to be very aware. When we keep practicing the skill, then it becomes a part of my subconscious programming. After that, it will not take effort. After that, unconsciously or subconsciously, you'll be able to apply these skills. So that is the reason why this is a skill building workshop, where you're going to learn skills, but it is only if you practice them, only if you remain aware, will you actually be able to bring about a difference in the children's life, right? Because we see that in the midst of a classroom crisis, no books, no lectures, no courses are going to help us. At the moment of truth, it is only skill that saves. So that is the reason that we need specific skills, to deal effectively and humanely, because we all know that, when we are having these classes, we are going to continuously there are going to be small irritations, there are going to be conflicts, there are going to be sudden crises. And what does a teacher's response do? A teacher's response will actually create the climate of compliance. A teacher's response is actually going to determine whether the mood is one of contentment or one of contention, a desire to make amends or to take revenge. It is going to affect the child's conduct and character for better or for worse. So see how important a teacher's response is, whether a child is going to become defiant or whether a child is going to comply. That is the reason skills are tools. Remember this, skills are tools. We need these tools to actually be able to deal with the day-to-day irritations, what are going to happen. Okay. 1 second, my slide is not changing. Revati, can you help? Yeah.
Does it work, ma'am? Do you want to stop sharing and reshare maybe?
Yeah, I'm not able to, change my slide.
Could you stop presenting?
Yeah, should I stop share?
Yes, yeah. Would you want to try again once more, and then otherwise we'll help you with the slides, ma'am?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, perfect. Started again.
Yes.
Fine, thank you. So now let's come to, let's see the skills. Okay, let's move on to the part which is of great importance here. So now you see here, I'm going to demonstrate to you, or rather say out to you, how teachers, when they are at their best, when they're applying the skills, how they behave. So for example, the first example I'm going to tell you is about a note of comfort. Just visualize that there is a child, visualize a classroom. I'm going to give you live classroom scenarios. Okay, there is a child, Paul Z. He's 9 years old child, and a teacher is distributing new books. Suddenly all the new books have arrived. It's a new class, and the teacher is, distributing the books. By the time she reaches Paul, the books have got finished. Now, Paul, who is very excited to receive this book, starts getting angry. My luck never sides me. I'm always the one who is unlucky. I'll never ever be able to do anything in life. Now this teacher, she realizes that this child is very upset. So one way could be, the teacher would have said, Paul, have some patience. There's nothing to get so upset about. Life is full of problems. You should know how to deal with these problems, right? Instead of that, this teacher, who was really at her best, who knew her skills, what she did? She wrote a note. She wrote a note to Paul. Dear Paul, I understand that you're very disappointed that you didn't get your book. I'm really going to make sure that you get your book, and I'm straight away going to the store to see if they have a book. And in case they don't have a book, I will give you my book for the time being, till the time you get a new book tomorrow. Kind regards, your teacher. Instantly, Paul calmed down. He was so happy that her teacher had not just started scolding, but his teacher actually understood that he was feeling upset. So what is a very, very important part I want all of you to understand is that when a teacher understands feelings, what was the feeling here? The feeling of being upset, the hurt, the disappointment, that was the feeling. A teacher did not disregard feelings. She actually, understood that he's feeling hurt, he's feeling neglected, or he's feeling unlucky because he has not received the book. So simply a note of comfort when she gave that child, he felt so important that, my teacher has given me a note, my teacher has written so nicely to me, that immediately his mood changed. He became calm, right? So now with another example, imagine help with algebra. So there was this child who's 14 years old, right? He's very shy. He's very hesitant to ask for help, and there are some algebra problems which have to be solved. And he's somehow not being able to solve these problems. So now this teacher, she sees that Ada is having a lot of problems with, solving these algebra questions. She goes up to him and says to this student, Ada, I understand that algebra is a difficult subject. There are figures, and then there are symbols, and then there are numbers. And so many times you have to substitute the numbers for the symbols, and then you have to change signs. And it's okay, you can just ask me for help. Just imagine how kind and competent this teacher was. Did she say that you're not working hard enough, you must work more, you must try and put in more effort at algebra, and I'm sure you're not going home and wasting time? Did she comment on the child? No, she just went and she tried to help the child. This is called an empathy, which is kind and competent. That algebra can be difficult, but I'm there, you can ask me for help. So this was such a beautiful way of the teacher to deal and to offer help, right? Another, this is one of my favorites, respect for art. So you just imagine a scenario that a teacher is walking into a class, right? She's walking and she glances at the blackboard, and at the blackboard, there's a sharp, accurate, and funny caricature of her face made on the blackboard. And then what happens? What would a normal teacher do? Make the class stand and ask, who's done this? And I don't expect such a kind of behavior from all of you. And instead of doing this, what the teacher said? Wow, this caricaturist is amazing. He's got an amazing talent. Wonderful, great. I really respect your art. And she went on with her teaching. She showed so much of competence. She showed so much of maturity. There was no shaming. She didn't feel hurt by the prank. She didn't take any personal offense. You see why I'm repeating this? Why no personal offense? Because you remember at the beginning, I said that suppose I respect my own self, will I really get hurt if I have a high self-esteem? Will I really get hurt by a child making a cartoon of my face? No. So that is what she did not even bother to search for the culprit, that who is the culprit? I'm going to punish this. She didn't shame anybody. She just went on with her studies, saved so much time, saved so much effort, saved the children from getting punished. There was no shaming. See, that's how a mature teacher, a patient teacher handles these small crises occurring in the class. This wonderful story. So, a substitute teacher, she walks into a classroom. And when she walks into the classroom, naturally, she's a substitute teacher and she doesn't remember the names of all the children. So, she asks one child, "What is your name?" And he replies, "I'm Mahatma Gandhi." And, the whole class bursts out laughing, and one option was that the teacher could have scolded him and, "Oh my God, you don't know how great Mahatma Gandhi was. Don't take his name so casually." And she could have scolded or punished the child, taken him to the vice principal. But you know what this teacher did? She just passed one comment. "Ah, a wonderful person. Do you want to become like him? What a wonderful person to emulate. I'm impressed." Now you see what a competent teacher. Again, saved so much time and effort. Something which would have become actually a discipline problem, something which could have become a very bitter exchange, was just solved. So see how beautiful all these examples are for us to learn how to handle in the time of crisis, to save so much time and effort. Another very thing, this is called consolation without explanation. Many times the children do not want to share what's wrong. Sometimes they're not comfortable because there are too many other kids around, or if a teacher is in the staff room, there are other teachers around, and a child comes crying. Suppose you are sitting in the staff room and a teacher comes and a student comes, sobbing to you. Now, he may not want to tell you what is the reason. You have to understand that in front of so many people, the child may just want some consolation. He may not want to give you an explanation in front of so many people. That is the time you can just hug the child. That is the time they need comfort. They do not need diagnosis. So remember to be there, to console a child when he needs it, even if he's not explaining why he needs that consolation. So moving on to, this is a very beautiful thing, which is called psychological first aid or even emotional first aid. So what happened, I'll explain this again with an example, that there's a boy, maybe call him Stephen. He was a 7 years boy, and the teacher has given them a lot of clay. And with this clay, this Stephen is making, a beautiful boat. He's making this boat, he's making small characters sitting in that boat, he's making oars, very diligently working. And when his boat is ready, he's, very proudly, he holds it in his hand and he turns around and he wants to go and show it to his teacher. And suddenly a classmate comes, bumps on him, and the boat falls down and the boat breaks. And this child, Stephen, he's very angry. And because he's so hurt, and so many times our hurt escalates into anger and aggression. He's so angry that he turns around and he hits that boy. The teacher observes what's happened. The teacher quietly gently goes there, brings Stephen, the boy who had made the boat. She comes, she tells him that, "I understand you're very hurt. You're very disappointed that your boat is broken. I'm sure you must be feeling really hurt inside you." The child feels so understood, that his teacher has understood and is not shouted at him that, "Why have you hit that person? Why have you hit Bruce? Don't you know how to behave in class?" Instead of that, what did the teacher do? She just administered emotional or psychological first aid, because he was bruised, because he was hurt, because he had put in so much effort at his boat. And that is the reason. Then suddenly she gives him some more clay and she says, "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll be able to make another one. And take your time, cool down. Whenever you're feeling fine, try and make another one." Stephen cools down and the situation is solved. Right? See, beautiful examples of how the teacher is actually handling these crises. Then this is one very beautiful thing: conferring dignity, valuing, cherishing character. In this, imagine there's a girl. She's actually a 12, 13-year-old girl. And, the teacher asks in class that who is going to volunteer on this weekend? I want somebody to help me in the library, to catalog the books. So this girl, Susan, she says, "Yes, ma'am, I'm going to come on this weekend to help you." And she's very excited about it. Wonderful. The teacher says, "Great, I'll wait for you. And you're going to help me in cataloging." She says, "Yes, I will." Now, by Saturday, this girl starts feeling very stressed. Why? because she has not completed her assignments. She has lots of assignments left, and she starts feeling so stressed. She starts crying that now, she can either go to the library and help her teacher because she's committed, but if she goes there, she will not be able to finish her assignments. Anyhow, she gets up and she goes to her teacher, and there she comes and tells her that, ma'am, I was feeling so stressed because I have not been able to complete my assignments and I'm cramped with work. The teacher, the librarian, she doesn't start telling him, you're so irresponsible, you should have finished your work on time, why did you not finish your work on time, you always leave work for the last minute. Instead of that, this librarian, what she says, you still came to help me. My God, that's integrity. You were so disheartened, you were so stressed, yet you came to school, yet you came and shared, and yet you are trying to help me out. That's discipline. Now the teacher's words, they acted as a balm. She felt so remarkable. She felt like a hero. She said, okay, now I'm going to help my teacher and go back home and also complete my homework. See, what did the teacher do? The teacher cherished her character. The teacher valued her integrity, that even despite so much homework, she didn't cancel coming and helping the teacher. She conferred dignity. So how beautifully this teacher handled this problem. And now, moving on, we've seen these were all examples of teachers at their best. Now let's see some teachers when they're at their worst. What happens, right? So let's see that there's a teacher who walks into the class and she tells all the students sitting there, take your seats. So there is one child, maybe Alfred. This child, continues standing in between in the class. He's not sitting. So the teacher shouts at him, are you naturally slow? No, whom do you want to come? You want some person? You want a lift? Whom do you want? Am I going to come and make you sit down in your seat? Don't you see we're getting late? Don't you have any sense? Are you naturally slow? Or why are you taking so much time to go and sit in your bench? Just imagine cutting comments and attack on the child. How this could have damaged a child. And such comments will evoke hate and revenge fantasy. And do you think this child, after hearing such comments from the teacher, will be able to concentrate on what is being taught? No. When children get, revenge fantasies, when children, those words which the teacher has said keep reverberating in their mind, those words of the teacher, are you naturally slow? Are you naturally slow? Are you naturally slow? They kept reverberating in his mind, and literally he blocked himself. He could not learn. So the teacher's motive, to make him learn or to do any work got defeated. See, that is why we have to be very careful of what a teacher says to her students. So another interesting example, which is called name calling. So there is a child, and let's name her Mona, and she comes to class and she's not finished her assignment. And the teacher asks, Mona, have you done your assignment? And she says, no, ma'am, I'm sorry, I couldn't complete my assignment. And the teacher starts, you are so lazy, you are very irresponsible, you're always careless, you never complete your work on time, I've been observing you for such a long time, I wonder when you'll be able to do it, I think I'll have to talk to your parents or I'll have to take you to the principal. How many names? Lazy, irresponsible, careless. How many names did the teacher give this child? No, she actually maximized the losses. There was no gain being made in name calling. And as we discussed above, what a teacher says actually has a very deep impact on the child's self-image. So you imagine, what is the self-image of this child? This child, Mona, may start thinking, oh my God, I'm really irresponsible. I'm really careless. I'm so lazy. And when all these words become a part of her self-image, right, what happens? As a self-fulfilling prophecy, the children become what they are labeled or what they are called. So see how we do so much of loss to the children by simply giving them names. And this name calling is absolutely a taboo. Remember not to give your children names. And moving on to the next, this is also a beautiful illustration, this example, invasion of privacy. So there's this girl, Janet, a 13-year-old, a very vivacious girl. And she's generally very loud and she's generally very talkative. So one day this girl, Janet, is sitting in her chair and she's very quiet and she's kind of brooding. And the teacher comes and, sees her that she's not smiling. So the teacher asks her, Janet, what's the matter? She says, nothing, ma'am. She says, no, I know something's wrong with you. Don't say lies. She says, ma'am, nothing, ma'am. She was just quiet. She says, no, ma'am, nothing's the matter. No, I know. Don't you think I know you? I understand you better than you know yourself. You are not the same. Tell me what's wrong with you. No, don't speak lies. Come on, be open. Tell me what's wrong with you. What was this? Invasion of privacy, right? It is very dangerous to play emotional detective with children, right? Good taste actually prohibits prying, and courtesy demands distance. When a child wants to tell you, the child will come up and tell you herself. It is not okay that we go on forcing themselves and we invade their privacy, trying to tell them that, no, you have to force them to, disclose. So disclosure is basically the right of a child, whether she wants to disclose. So this matter has to be dealt with very carefully. You can ask a child, would you like to share? Would you like to come and tell me if something is troubling you? But if a child doesn't want to, please do not invade privacy, right? Moving on to the next, which is not a laughing matter. Okay, Andy. Now just imagine that there's a child, Andy, and there is a board. And the teacher has called him that, come on, Andy, solve this maths problem. So solve this multiplication problem on the board. Andy comes and he makes mistakes. He's not able to solve it. And the teacher says, whenever you open your mouth, you subtract from the sum of human knowledge. And the entire class starts laughing. You just imagine what this child must have gone through. You really can't do anything. Whenever I come, whenever I call you, you're never able to solve it. I think you must be really serious about your studies. And this boy, what did the teacher do to this boy? Destroyed his self-esteem. What did the child need? The child needed instruction. The child did not need a destruction of self-esteem. But see how a small comment, a negative comment, a sarcastic comment can actually spoil or destroy a child's self-esteem. And when the entire class starts laughing, you imagine how that child would be feeling inside him, how sad, how bad, how hurt. And again, this child, after he, what children do whenever these teachers or elders give such sarcastic comments, these children turn to, what they do is they learn to block their minds. Actually, what they do is they close their minds. And after that, they're not able to learn anything, because that's the way they save themselves. Because if they hadn't blocked their mind, all those things would go on and on. He would keep hearing the children laughing. So how did he respond? Now, this child, he responded by blocking his mind. And once the mind is blocked, you can't teach this child anything. The child will not learn anything. So see how difficult it is for children to hear such negative and sarcastic comments. And very similar to this, is that there is a teacher who tells this child to go and open the window, and the child is somehow unable to open it. And the child and the teacher starts commenting, don't you know anything? When is it that you will know how to do things properly? And then suddenly what happens? This child starts crying, because what happens in children are not sure of their abilities. They don't know what they are capable of. They don't know what kind of resources they hold inside them. And when you publicly attack their intelligence, what happens? You hit them at the most vulnerable spot. Because you imagine, if I'm unsure of my ability and somebody comes and tells me, hey, you don't know anything, you'll not be able to do anything properly. What is happening? I'm being hit at my most vulnerable spot. And a public attack on intelligence in the form of verbal spankings, tongue lashing, it is the worst kind of damage we can do to the children. Again, what are we doing? We are basically maximizing losses. We may not gain anything, but we are certainly maximizing losses by behaving in such manners. So what do we need to do? We need to be very aware. Every teacher needs to be aware of attitudes that alienate, words that insult, acts that hurt. Teachers and parents can prevent vanishing virtues. You know that so many of these virtues are vanishing. Now, at this point, I want all of you to just close your eyes for a minute. For a minute, just imagine there is a teacher entering a class. She enters the class very sternly and she tells all the children, come on, open your books. Oh, this is okay, maybe a senior class, right? And she tells the children, I'm drawing on the board, copy this drawing. This drawing is of the lungs. And see, this is the pathway, this is the nose, here is the trachea, this is the windpipe, and then it divides into two bronchioles, and then here it goes into the lungs. Come on, have you made this drawing? Come on, label the parts. This is how she starts. Just imagine this scenario. Did the teacher show delight in the children? Did the teacher enter the class and, smiled at the children? Did the children feel that our teacher is happy to see us? Wow, she's so interested in, teaching us, how much of knowledge she's sharing with us, how happy she is, how positive she is. Did the teacher do anything like that? Did the teacher bother to motivate? So what is motivation? I want to take your attention to this process. We've heard so many of us, talking, we must motivate. But what is motivation? See, if you go deeply, motivation is a process that prepares a child for loving what he's doing. So you imagine that once the child starts loving what he's doing, will he actually need to be motivated? Will we even have to tell him to do anything? So that is why it is so important that a child starts loving what he's doing. And there is this fact which I love, that all we call education was conceived in love and an act of loving. It requires preparation. See, it requires warmth, it requires care, it requires ease, it requires sensitivity, tenderness, and skill. So there was this beautiful, fantastic, teacher. And I always seen him that when he enters a class, or he enters a workshop, what he does is he will first either play some nice music for a minute, or he will tell the children, hey, are you all ready? Come on, let's move, get up, stand, stretch. And, so he excites the children. He makes them love what they are doing. He interests them, he engages them, he holds their attention. And that is the time when children get motivated to learn. And what happened in this scenario? The teacher was just trying to forcibly put information into the child's mind. And when we are just trying to forcibly give the children information, the child responds by closing his mind. So that is the difference. And I'm going to speak about motivation a little later, a bit more, to tell you in greater detail, because that is one of the questions which all of us are asked the most. How should we motivate children? So in a moment, I'm going to talk more about it. Before that, let's move on to communication. So how should our communication be? What do we want to do? We basically want to improve life in the classroom, right? And if we have to improve life in the classroom, what do we have to learn? We have to first start examining how we respond to the children. How a teacher communicates is of decisive importance. And that is what is going to affect the child's life, whether the child's life is going to be good or bad, whether the child's self-image about himself is going to be that he's he's a wonderful person, he's an amazing person, or whether the child thinks that I'm useless and I'm worthless. And to tell you here a very important difference, that this difference is fateful, if not fatal, because we've seen the world over, we've seen cases of depression and anxiety. They have been on especially after the pandemic, even before the pandemic, and more so after the pandemic, the number of cases of depression and anxiety have increased. And at the core of depression, what is the problem? The person who goes into depression feels that he's worthless, feels that the future is hopeless, and feels that he's unlovable. So if we only instill fear, and at the core of anxiety, there is fear of the future, right? And we as teachers, if we increase this feeling of worthlessness, if we increase this feeling of uselessness, powerlessness, helplessness in children, or we instill fear in the minds of these children that your life is doomed, you'll never be able to do anything, you're so useless, what are we doing? We are increasing the load of mental health problems in the world. And like I said, I remind you again and again, above all, do no damage. If we can't make gains, don't make gains. But please do not instill so much fear and sadness and hopelessness in children. And your language is so important. How you communicate, what are your words, what is your body language is really of decisive importance of what a child believes about himself or herself. Whether a child believes that I'm powerful, whether a child believes that I'm so helpless, whether a child believes that I'm so valued, or whether a child believes that I'm worthless and useless. And that is going to be the difference, whether when these children grow up to be adults, whether they're going to suffer from mental health problems or whether they're going to be mentally healthy. So see how important this communication between a child and a teacher is. So what do we need to learn? We need to unlearn the habitual language of rejection and acquire a new language of acceptance. And we must capture a child's heart in order to reach the child's mind. Because only if a child is feeling right can he think right. So if a child is feeling happy, and in one of the researches I've read in one of the papers, they said if a child is happy for 24 hours, his learning capacity doubles. So you just imagine that if a child is feeling happy, also I've read that if a child, when he sits to study, if he's happy, if he's curious, if he's excited, his learning capacity improves manyfold. So you see how, if we make the children feel good, if we make them actually feel better, how it will impact their learning. So that is the reason why we actually need to capture a child's heart in order to reach his mind, in order to make him open to learning, in order for him to grasp what is being taught. Because a child otherwise will block us out. A child who's angry, a child who's absorbed in hate, a child who's absorbed in revenge fantasies, is going to respond by blocking his mind. And such a child is not going to learn anything. So that is the reason why we need to actually capture the child's heart, right? And so what is the cardinal principle of communication? This is a very, very important thing. If teachers should address themselves to a child's situation, and at their worst, what do? We judge the character and personality of a child. And I'm going to explain this with examples. But remember that this is the difference between effective and ineffective communication. So we all have to learn what is the difference, that in every situation, how do we address ourselves to the situation? And we do not judge the character and personality of a child. Now, to explain this in greater detail, let's consider some examples. A child forgot to return a book to the library. Now, addressing the situation. See, what are we addressing? The child's situation. So teacher A said, your book needs to be returned to the library. It is overdue. That's it. Now, another teacher, addressing him to the child's character and personality, said, you are so irresponsible. You always procrastinate and forget. Why didn't you return the book to the library? Can you see the difference? The first teacher, teacher A, is just talking about the situation. What needs to be done? There is a book which needs to be returned to the library. That is the situation. So she's simply addressing herself to the situation. And teacher B, who is causing damage to the child, is basically labeling the character of the child. What has she labeled the personality of the child? That the child is irresponsible, she always forgets, she procrastinates. See, these are all labels we are giving to the child's personality, which are becoming a part of the child's self-image. You see, all these things being said are actually becoming a part of the child's self-image. Moving on, another example, a child has spilled paint. So addressing himself to the situation, teacher says, oh, I see the paint spilled. We need a water and rag. Come on, let's go get a water and rag. Let's clean it up. That's it. Addressing himself to the child's personality and character, teacher B said, you're so clumsy. Why are you always so careless? Always you are, making a mess in the classroom. See, what was that teacher doing? She was actually labeling the child's character and personality, which would again become a part of the child's self-image, right? Another example, the teenager had been coming to school disheveled, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, addressing himself to the situation. Teacher A said, young woman or young man, improvement is needed in your grooming and attire. And addressing himself to the child's character. Everything about you is a mess. Your clothes are disheveled. Your hair is dirty. Even your brain is disorganized. What's the matter with you? Unless you shape up, you'll be thrown out of class. See, how many labels has this teacher given to the child's personality and character? Do you think that this child would really want to improve? So see how a teacher talks, whether the teacher just addresses the situation or the teacher ends up labeling and not labeling, it's negative labeling of the personality of the child, of the character of the child, is going to really damage the child to a great extent. So in all the preceding examples, if you saw that teacher A was conveying concern and was caring, teacher B aroused anxiety and resentment. So please remember the statement, talking to the situation and not to the personality and character is the cardinal principle of communication. And it holds true for all encounters. And how, when I learn to apply this principle under varied conditions, that is the essence of effective communication between the child and the educator. Moving to expressing anger. The realities of teaching. We all know that, we all get angry at certain times. But what is the difference between an enlightened teacher and an effective teacher? And a teacher who may express anger in a very in a provocative way, right? So a teacher who is basically enlightened, even under provocation, will not call the children abusive names or will not attack their character. What will he do? This teacher will describe what he sees, what he feels, what he expects. What does he attack? He attacks the problem and not the person. And what does he do? How does he say it? He uses I messages. What are the I messages? I am annoyed. I'm angry. I'm appalled. I'm furious. Now, these statements are saying what the teacher feels. And these are much safer statements than saying, you are a pest. Look what you've done. You are stupid. Who do you think you are? In these statements, in the statements given below, what is the teacher doing? Again, what is she doing? She's naming the personality and character, right? And in the first, she's expressing, or she's basically telling what she's feeling, that I'm angry, I'm appalled, I'm furious. So I hope you understand this difference. And why this is very difficult, because the native tongue of lost tempers is insult. Whenever we are angry, whenever we have a temper, we want to insult the other person. And that is why it is a skill. We have to remain very aware, because we have to express our anger, but without causing insult, without causing damage. So that is why it is beautifully said that say no to indignity. Indignation, some amount of anger. I can say I'm angry, that's okay. But say no to indignity. In your anger, please do not damage the children, do not insult the children, do not humiliate the children, right? For example, when Mrs. Brooks, the kindergarten teacher, saw 5-year-old Alan throw a stone at his friend, she said loudly, I saw it. I'm indignant and dismayed. Stones are not for throwing at people. People are not for hurting. Now, did the teacher anyway, at any place, insult Alan? Did she give him names? Did she attack his personality? Did she attack Alan's character? What did she do? She simply said a statement that I am dismayed, I am indignant, right? Stones are not for throwing, people are not for hurting, right? So see how beautifully she conveyed what had to be conveyed. And another teacher may have actually said, are you crazy? You could have injured your friend. You could have crippled him. Is that what you want? You are a cruel child. How much of damage this teacher could have done? Moving on, let's skip this example because we have a lot to cover and it's already 5 o'clock. Respecting autonomy. So giving children a voice and choice in matters that affect life in school. So just read this example. It started to snow. The children ran to the windows and began to scream and cheer. The teacher offered them a choice. You can watch the snow in silence or you can get back to your work, you decide. The noise died instantly, and the children watched the snow in delightful calm. What did the teacher give? She knew that the snow is falling and the children are going to be excited. She didn't scream at the children, you are always getting disturbed, or you are spoiling the class, you're not allowing me to teach. She didn't say all that. Simply, she gave them a voice and choice in a matter, basically because the children were in school. So respecting autonomy is also, very important. Coming to commands, giving commands is basically what happens. If you avoid commands, you can decrease defiance, because children literally hate to be ordered around, to be dictated, to be bossed. Do what you're told, don't ask questions. And when a teacher conveys whatever she wants to say with respect, and with when she safeguards self-esteem, the children basically resist a teacher less and they listen to the teacher more. For example, just imagine a teacher simply may say, the arithmetic assignment is on page 60. And another teacher may say, take out your arithmetic book, place it on the table, open page 60, right? What is she doing? She's giving commands. Just the body language, just the tone is a very commanding tone. Instead, the teacher just needed to say that the arithmetic assignment is on page 60. It is understood that the children have to open the book and open page 60. So that's how avoiding commands. Moving on to acceptance and acknowledgement, right? Teachers are told that children need understanding and acceptance, but what they are not told, how to convey it under the different classroom conditions. And there is the difference between critical and uncritical messages. Whenever children are given uncritical messages, it invites cooperation, and a critical one engenders resistance. How? Imagine this scenario. A child interrupts the teacher. The teacher tells the child, I would like to finish my sentence. Another teacher could have said, you're very rude, you have no manners, you are interrupting me, you have no patience. Develop some patience. See how what teacher B said could have caused so much of resistance, could have caused irritation in the child. The child would have again felt hurt at what the teacher has said. And teacher A has simply conveyed the message, I would like to finish my sentence, and she can say it in a firm tone. She doesn't even need to shout. She doesn't need to use name calling, no labeling. Very similarly, two boys are conversing while homework is being assigned. I'm assigning homework. It needs to be written down now. And teacher B, don't you have anything better to do than to talk? Why don't you start writing this down? See how what teacher A is doing and how teacher B is communicating makes so much of a difference, whether the child will resist, whether the child is going to cooperate, or whether the child is not going to listen. That's the difference all these things make, right? Teachers A's messages spared feelings and stated what is expected. What did this do? It de-escalated conflict. What did teachers B's messages do? It aroused resentments and increased tension. This is very important. Labeling is disabling. Please understand this. Simon, age 14, was late for school, and his teacher said, what is your excuse this time? Simon told his story. The teacher answered, I don't believe a single word you said. I know why you're late. What did the teacher do? Diagnose. You're lazy to get up on time. Labeling. If you don't shape up, warning. You know where you'll end up. Doom prediction. See how labeling is disabling, how many, effective communication has to be devoid of all these things, and how many things this teacher did: diagnosed, labeled, warned, doom prediction. So see how these all have basically violated the tenets of effective communication. In dealing with children, don't delve into the case history of the child and his family. Diagnosing is dangerous. Remember, labeling is disabling. The diagnosis may become a disease, right? Diagnosis, you are lazy, a label, it may become a disease. Like Anna said, a self-fulfilling prophecy. The child lives up to the label. He becomes what he is told he is. And in education, there is no place for such statements like you are a crybaby, you're irresponsible, you're stupid, you're a bunch of fools, you'll end up in jail, you are a disgrace. Please remember, all these are very disabling statements. And once teachers assimilate the principle of no labeling, they become more helpful even in difficult moments. Even in very difficult moments, the teachers can be really helpful. Destination may become destiny. So when we tell when we tell children that you're going to end up nowhere, you'll have no future, you'll have no money, you'll never be able to make a career, it actually may become the destiny, because like I said, whatever we are talking is becoming a part of the child's self-image, and a child becomes what he is told he is, right? Similarly, doom predictions, that you are going to fail in life miserably, you'll never be able to make a life for yourself, and you know where you're going to land up, or you'll land up in jail, or you'll never be able to pass this class, you'll continue failing. How many doom predictions we make for children. Remember, a teacher and a parent hold great power to plant seeds of doubt in a child's mind, because like I told you, children are never sure of their abilities. We have to make them aware of their abilities. We have to tell them that there are great unlimited potential and resources. And who other than a teacher who herself believes that I have unlimited potential? See, a teacher, like I said, my beliefs are going to influence my children, right? And I don't have to impose imaginary limitations on children. Very similar to this is, see, correction is direction. What does it, whenever a child needs correction, how do we correct a child, right? For example, there's a high school teacher who's reading a child's essay, and this teacher comments on the student's essay by writing, "You're an expert in the art of bad handwriting." And another teacher writes, "What pretentious and loquacious prose, you write like a moron." Now, what did the teacher needed to do? Was all this criticism needed? These children basically needed direction. They could have simply, the teacher could have said, look for words you can omit, avoid introductory phrases, start directly with facts, be brief, just like the newspaper writes news. You could have guided him, you could have guided the child. The child did not need criticism. So what is happening here? Factless comments defeat a child. They do not improve his work in any way. This is so important, and this, moving on to this question, once upon a time, this why, why did this why develop? Because why was basically a term of inquiry. What did it signify? It signified curiosity. But now, what has happened to this why? Now, why is used for criticism, disapproval, disappointment. Why can't you be good for a change? Why are you so slow? Why do you forget everything? So can you see how we are damaging children by using why in such a manner? And a wise teacher always avoids harmful questions. Suppose a child says, "I'm not prepared for the test," right? The teacher resisted the temptation. What is your problem? Why are you not prepared for the test? Why are you so stupid? Why are you so irresponsible? Instead, the teacher responded, "We have a problem. What is the solution?" See, we have to focus at solutions. She is already not prepared for the test. Is asking so many questions that what is your problem? Why are you irresponsible? Can you help the child in any way? Can the lost time come back, that the child is not prepared for the exam and now she's in school? Can we in any way help the child by saying such statements? So you see how a teacher's questions should not be harmful. A teacher has to be a problem solver. So, we say that suppose you want your children to be good problem solvers, you have to be a good role model. So the teacher could have responded that, okay, now we have this problem. You're not prepared for the test. What can we do about it? What is the solution? Right? So avoid harmful questions. Now, children's comments, very often, let's skip this and move to no sarcasm because we have less time left. So teachers sometimes insult or hurt children with casual comments, right? For example, the child, "I had a severe headache last night, so I couldn't study for this test. May I be excused for now and take the test another day?" The teacher replies, "You're a liar, always ready with excuses. You think you're too smart and can fool me. You're going to get a big zero." What did the teacher did? She injured the child, and hurt, the child will again get preoccupied with revenge fantasies. Remember, a teacher's role is to heal, not to injure. Brevity. Students close their mind to an over-talkative teacher. See, there's a small thing that there's a child who lost his pencil, and the teacher says, "Did you find your pencil? What did you do with it? Did you eat it up? You can't do work without it. Wait, I'll get you one. And don't come running to me that you lost that one too." this teacher used too many words, so many sentences were so unnecessary. The teacher could have handed John a pencil graciously without saying a word, without probing or disturbing the class. So much time, effort, and energy could have been saved. And like this, there are many minor mishaps. A teacher should remain solution oriented. Suspending judgment. It is extremely important. Please, during the day when you come back home, come and think, how many times did you use these adjectives? Right, wrong, good, bad, smart, stupid. Re-examine the quality of your comments, the comparisons you made, and the judgmental tone. All are very, very harmful to a child, right? Discipline. Beautiful. I raise my voice to end the noise. I use force to break up fighting. I am rude to a child who's impolite. I berate a child who uses bad language. See, this is such a paradox. If we as teachers, we raise our voice, we shout, or we are using force, or we are becoming rude, or we are berating, we are not setting appropriate role models. So how can I actually, put in children, teach children those things which I myself am not following? And I'm trying to eradicate bad things or things which are not behaviors which are unhelpful. But if I myself continue doing these behaviors, how is it possible that the children, the students are going to basically learn? So who is a true disciplinarian? See, this is beautiful. One who does not react impulsively, whose words are chosen, not triggered, who responds insightfully. His acts are selected, not compelled, who does not believe in punishment. He has a distaste for violence. He shows grace under pressure. This is my favorite comment. We all teachers are going to be under pressure sometime or the other. When we show grace under pressure, that's a true disciplinarian. If there's no pressure and if we are very, cool, calm, and well behaved, that's okay. Anybody can do that. But under pressure, when we maintain that grace, under pressure, when we maintain that calm, that warmth, that kindness, such a disciplinarian can actually move children from terror to trust. Punishment. Punishment does not deter misconduct. So beautifully explained. What happens? It only makes the offender more skillful in escaping detection. When a child is punished, he resolves to be more careful. So, a child, he comes home, to school one day late, and the teacher asks him, why are you late? So he comes and tells the truth that, ma'am, I don't know what happened. Either my alarm didn't ring, I just couldn't get up, and I, got late. I suddenly got up and I realized it was very late. And this child was being honest. The teacher punished him. The teacher made him stand out of class, right? After a few days again it happened that this child comes to school late. The teacher asked him, what happened this time? Alfred, what happened this time again? Now, the first time Alfred was truthful. He had told teacher the truth. This time, Alfred knew that if he tells the teacher the truth, that he could not get up in time, the teacher will again punish him. So now what does Alfred do? Oh, ma'am, I can't tell you. I just, I either had a vomit, or the child will say, I slipped and, I could have broken my head, or I almost, was saved from an accident. Now, what is the child doing? He's becoming more and more skillful. He's resolving to be more careful, not more honest and responsible. Can you see how this influences? Punishment only serves the need of the punishing adult. It does not serve the need of a child, doesn't make a child more honest and responsible. And ethical concepts can only be taught in concrete life situations from people one respects. One grows into virtue. And more than punishment, positive disciplinary methods are much more useful. Motivating students. This is a wonderful part. Just understand this very carefully. How to motivate children. This is a question very frequently asked. And the beautiful answer is make it safe for them to risk failure. A major obstacle to learning is fear. Children are scared. They are scared of failure. They have this fear of criticism. They have the fear of appearing stupid. And when you remove this fear and you welcome mistakes, you will always encourage learning. And a beautiful example that in one class, the teacher and her students, they discussed that what is the meaning of failure, what actually does failure mean. And then they made a beautiful list and they displayed it prominently on the front wall. And what were the sayings? In this class, it is permissible to make mistakes. An error is not a terror. You may err, but don't embrace your error. Mistakes are for correcting. Value your correction, not your error. Don't let failure get to your head. Can you see? In this class, will children be afraid of failure? Will children be afraid of making mistakes? Will they have the fear of being ridiculed? Will they have the fear of criticism? Will they have the fear of appearing stupid? And when they don't have this fear, what will they do? They will embrace learning. They will attempt, they will try, they will put in their best, even though the result may not be in their hand, right? And a tale of motivation. Yes. So now there is this, there's a cramped attic, and a fire breaks out in this cramped attic. And, all the firemen, they are running to save the people. And there's a man who's heavily asleep. He's so heavily asleep. And these people are trying to, carry him. Somebody is lifting his hands, somebody is lifting his legs, somebody is putting his hands under the back. And they're unable to do so because he's really heavy. And suddenly the chief arrives. All these firemen are despairing. How do we save this man? And suddenly the chief arrives. And all the firemen go to him and tell him, we are not able to lift this man. How do we do it? You know what the chief says? Wake him up. Wake him up and he will save himself. What do we need to do? We need to wake up our children. We need to wake them up and tell them that they have unlimited resources. They have unlimited potentials. The unknown is not fearful. The uncertain is not necessarily a fearful place. We can be creators. We don't have to live like victims. And that is what all of us, all as teachers, need to do. We need to wake up our children, awaken them to their potential, awaken them to all the resources, and let them just enjoy the present moment. Learn, teach them to be in the present moment. So that's how, what the moral of the story said, that children need to be awakened and they will save themselves. Side with the hidden asset that, there are so many children who will have some hidden assets. It is a child's duty. It is a teacher's duty. Find the hidden asset so that you minimize a child's deficiencies. Do not, tell that this is what is deficient. This is what is deficient. Rather, find the hidden asset, intensify his experience and enlarge his life. And how can you do that? A very simple question. In every crisis, in every encounter, if every teacher simply asks this question, how can I be helpful right now? How can I minimize losses? If you simply ask this question to yourself, you will be able to deal with so many situations which are happening in class on a daily basis. And this approach will have we are not going to find faults with the children. We are not going to establish guilt, because see, more and more guilt, more and more negative emotions. And when the child is in guilt, when the child is feeling so many negative emotions, his performance will be hampered, his learning will be hampered, and no meting out punishment. So to all the teachers here, remember, you are extremely powerful. I want all of you teachers, parents, that, be aware of the power you hold. I have come to a frightening conclusion. I am the decisive element in this classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor. I can hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. A student's testimony. What a student wrote about a favorite teacher. Mr. Jacobs won our hearts because he treated us though we were already what we could only hope to become. Through his eyes, We saw ourselves as capable, decent, and destined for greatness. Mr. Jacobs introduced us to ourselves. We learned who we are. Remember, people with unlimited potential and what we wanted to be. No longer strangers to ourselves, we felt at home in the world. So beautifully expressed by a student. Thank you so much. And I hope all of you can be such teachers, get inspired, and remember that all of you have unlimited potential. All of us, actually, including children, are really empowered and we have unlimited potential. Only we need to tap into that source, which is very much within us, which is very much inside us. Thank you so much for the wonderful patient hearing that all of you have given. Thank you, Ability. Thank you, Revati.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an amazing session. It was so soothing to all our ears and we had a lot of insights and it was a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you.
Now, before we begin with our Q&A session, let me quickly take our audience through some of the things. If you could stop sharing, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So before we begin with our Q&A session for today, I would like to take you all through our upcoming workshops on Module 3. We have an upcoming workshop on what is inclusion, what is an inclusive school and its benefits by Ms. Balasaraswati Nair, which would be happening on the 12th of October. Followed by we have a workshop on setting up a student support service department in an inclusive school, which would be conducted by Ms. Shivani Vadwa and also Mrs. Smita Tripathi on the 21st of October. All this workshop would be happening 4 p.m. Indian time, 12:30 p.m. Indonesian time, 6:30 p.m. Singapore and Philippine times. Do check the link out that's being shared right now in the chat box and register yourself to book your slot. And also, if you want to recommend these workshops to your fellow friends, do share the same link that's being shared right now in the chat box. Moving on, let me also take you all through the platform. We have pushed an update. Now doing everything in our platform is very, very easy. And by a click of button, you'll be able to do a lot many things with one of the platform that we have. So for you to register for the events, all you have to do is log in with your Ability credentials, and the event that is of interest to you, you will be able to find them all in the event section, and you will be able to register for the event by the click of register to this event button. Following which, you'll also be able to submit your questions directly to the speakers for the particular workshops that you've registered yourself for. And also remember, if you don't have any questions, but you feel some other question of another participant is actually relevant to you, you can also upvote the questions. So the questions that's getting the most upvotes would be prioritized by the speakers. Not only this, members who are there with us for a very long time knows that as part of each of the workshops that you attend, Ability would be sharing exclusive resources. As part of today's workshop also, we have curated a set of resources for you to read and also watch through. Do check out all the resources and let us know your comments, your thoughts by liking, your commenting and sharing the resources with fellow friends. Finally, you'd also be able to find all related events in the related events section based on the interest. And also for members who've been attending continuous workshops with Ability, you will be able to keep track of all the events that you've been attending over My Events tab here. We hope that you have more learning and happy learning with us. Now let's begin with the Q&A session for today. Ma'am, because we discussed a lot about how important a role of teacher is in a classroom setup and also to bring a change on the student's life, let's take a moment back, and there's one question from Rosalind and Maria who wants to know, as educators or teachers, there are a lot of things like what you mentioned, there are too many pressures from the administration with delivery of lesson plans and everything that's happening in a school setup. And sometimes teachers tend to feel like they're out of gas. So in such situation, what are certain things that teachers can do to actually prevent and also promote their self-care practices? Do you have any insight on those slides, ma'am?
Yeah, sure. Rosalind and Mary. Do I have the right names, Revati?
Rosalind and Michelle, ma'am.
Michelle. So Rosalind and Michelle. Always self-care, precedes other care. I understand we have work to do, we have deadlines to meet, we have children to teach, but you have to go on recharging yourself. And for every person, the recharge way is different. But for some it may be meditation, for some it may be yoga, for some it may be just singing, for some it may be dancing. It is that you have to remind yourself that you are, again, people with unlimited potential. Your self-talk, how you pep yourself up and how you take care of your own mind, body, and soul. Every teacher, every human being has this mind, body, and soul, right? So each part of yours, whether your mind is a beautiful mind, are you taking responsibility for your body? Are you taking responsibility for your soul? So completely take the responsibility of self-care. And when you are involved in your work, do it with so much of grace and keep repeating that, I am doing my work with grace, ease, and joy. Work is flowing to me. So make sure to make your self-talk very positive. That will help you burn out, because the mind and body is very deeply connected. You imagine a person continuously telling himself, oh my God, I'm breaking, I can't handle it, oh my God, I can't take this, I'm literally breaking up. What will happen? Your body will actually start giving way, because that's the command your mind is giving to your body. And suppose you keep telling yourself, oh yes, I can handle it, oh my God, oh yes, I've got unlimited potential. Yes, that is your self-talk. Plus taking care of your own self, your own mind, your own body. Mind, meditation works from the mind to the body. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, all work from the body to the mind. And of course, the soul, whether, you like gratitude, forgiveness, kindness, all these things are really soothing to the soul. When suppose I'm a teacher and I feel grateful that, wow, I'm so blessed, I've got this role of a teacher, I want to do my best. So how beautiful you will feel. You will, sense, you will feel gratitude. You will feel happy, because, somebody who's grateful cannot be unhappy. So see, so many practices. And of course, I can continue talking on these lines for very long, but let's take up the other questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for emphasizing on the concept of mind-body connection and the importance of self-talk, because the thoughts that we have is making the reality of the world that we live in for all of us. So that is a very, very insightful sharing from your end. Next, we have a question from Ms. Manju and Rory, who wants to know that based on your discussion, it seems like, and also their question is, as teachers, there are a lot of things to do, and academic is the core focus in most schools. But is it also important as teachers to have a connect and also facilitate in the emotional and the overall development of the student? If so, what are certain things that we can do on a regular basis as teachers to actually help in promoting these development of children?
Wonderful. It is academics is just one part of life. See, life is basically a matrix, and academics is a part of it. So we have to look after the social, the emotional, the behavioral, all aspects of a child. Because like I said, if a child, when does a child, if you go into any child's behavior, when does a child behave badly? When he's not feeling good. See, if I have anger inside me, what am I going to do outside? I will start shouting. So if my child's behavior is not good, instead of just, being palliative and saying, stop talking, stop shouting, be quiet, I have to get to the root. I have to get to the core. Why is this child behaving badly? What is it that he's feeling hurt? Is there some anger is feeling? So when we try and understand that what a child is feeling, and if we deal with feelings, the behavior will, as it is, become corrected. See, when I'm feeling peaceful, when I'm feeling calm, I'm not going to be shouting on the outside. Right? So deal with the feelings before dealing with behaviors. And like I said, that, when a child is hurt, when a child is, a child's is, absorbed in revenge, in hate, in anger, what a child does is he responds by blocking his mind. When I reach the heart of the child, when I express warmth, when I express concern, when I express understanding, and when a child's heart opens, when a child is happier, that is the time when you can actually even make him learn better. The child will perform academically much better when he's feeling happier, when he's more cheerful, when he's more enthusiastic, when he's curious, when he's inspired, when he's motivated. So generally we suggest start your classes with a little bit of inspiration, motivation, movement. Just enter the class, tell all of them to stand, tell them to stretch, tell them to say, hey, thank you, God, we've got such beautiful things. Just thank you. So try out various things. How you can start your class by inspiring the children, by motivating them to learn. Academics is just one part of life. It's not life.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering that part and giving your insight to it. Inspiration, motivation, and movement is the key to go with all of this. Next, we have a question from Miss Marinas, who wants to know, like, sometimes as teachers, we get overwhelmed in a classroom setup, especially when we are having an experience with child interaction in a classroom or while teaching. So what are some of the things that we can do when we know something is actually triggering us or we're getting overwhelmed? What are some of the things that we can do immediately to calm ourselves or get a balance that? Could you share some insights on
Yeah, wonderful question. So for this, mindfulness is the best thing that I have come across so far. Mindfulness is basically I start observing myself. When I observe myself, it's from a distance, like I dissociate and I observe my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own behaviors. So for a moment, if I start deep breathing and I observe, hey, this is what is triggering me. This is what was my thought. This is what was my feeling, right? The moment I start observing, I will start becoming more calm and still inside me. So mindfulness, whether you do it with observing and deep breathing, just you close your eyes and just slow your breathing, make it as deep as possible. Come to the present moment, come to your body, just see what you're feeling. What are the sensations in your body? What are the thoughts running in your mind? It's a beautiful way to calm down and come back to the present moment.
Wonderful, ma'am. Wonderful insights. Breathing gives a lot of cue about what is happening internally a lot. So paying attention to that is a key thing. Thank you so much, ma'am. Next, we have a question from Miss Deepa. Miss Deepa is a student. She wants to know, she's actually a student. She's observed that her professors have been using certain things that you mentioned in terms of teachers becoming a little unruly. So what is that she can do as a student to orient them on these lines? Because the students are the one who are experiencing it at the end of the day. So do you have anything for Miss Deepa that she could try out?
Deepa, wonderful question. I wish your teachers can attend a session. You can if you have anybody whom you know in school, or you can send them the link of this ability workshop that, I attended this wonderful workshop and, it would help you so much. When I got so much help from this workshop. So the best way would be, I think, that you can, send them the link to this workshop, because, as a student, if you go and try and correct, they will feel that you are judging them, which may spoil the relationship between, between the student and the teacher. So I think the best thing is, sometimes we need to not be direct and we can be indirect, because we don't want to hurt them also, right? So I think sharing this session with them would be a wonderful idea. I think that's the best idea I can think of in the moment.
Yeah, that would be a good start to it, ma'am. Next, we have a question from Mr. David, who wants to know, especially children who transfer from one school to another. So what are certain things that teachers need to be mindful of to actually make this child feel included in the classroom setting?
Yeah. So I've dealt with a lot of such children, because when, children come from one school to another school, first and the most important thing is they need to adjust to so many things. They need to, they need friends. They will feel alone. So the most important thing a teacher can do is to inspire the children, the other children who are already there in class, to support that child. Basically, to let that child feel included. See, our entire focus is any child should feel included. The classroom is inclusive. So when the other children, welcome that new child, that child will feel so good. When he feels good, when he's happier, and when he starts building relationships with the other children there, he'll feel much better. So I think that is the place where we should start from. Of course, besides that, what we can do, to academically help him, suppose he doesn't have copies and he's lost out on some work, so we can tell some children to share those copies with him, so that he doesn't, because he is a new child, he will not know the names, he will not know whom to contact, and the other children may not be willing to give, because they also don't know that child, right? So the teacher, as a teacher, you can ask him, what are the problems, call that, what is the things, do you have any problems in class, are you able to make friends, are they treating you well, do you have any problems in getting access to copies, notebooks, work which has been done earlier, how can I help you, can I get you the photocopies? Basically making him feeling welcome. They say that there's a beautiful saying, people will forget what you did, but people will not forget how you made them feel. So you make that child feel welcome, feel included, that he says, oh yes, I have so much support.
Wonderful, ma'am. I was also reminded of that quote that you shared right now. People will never forget how you made them feel. So making them feel respected and included is a key aspect to build anything with anyone. Thank you so much, ma'am, for that insight. Next, we have Miss Ruchi, Desi, and multiple others. Because of the current online session, the key is a lot of children are not able to stay focused and being distracted with online games, online surfing while the classes are happening, especially from the higher grades. So do you have any comments on what teachers can do to keep the classrooms interesting? And what are some of the positive things that can be done to keep them motivated for a long time in online class?
Yeah, so a few of them which I tell teachers to use are, what the first thing, what you need to do is engagement. In anything, you want the child to be engaged, right? And how will you make him feel engaged? Number one, the atmosphere should be really exciting. Something like, you make the children, everybody say 1, 2, 3, and all of them say together, come on, good morning. So I'm saying 1, 2, 3, and you're repeating good morning. So the children start becoming engaged. Then another way is movement. It's not that if it is a online class, you can't move. Teachers have to keep moving, like move close to the camera, keep looking, oh, where are you kids? Move away from the camera, or make the children that wherever they're standing, okay, kids, can I get up and can we have a stretch? So movement will literally help them, engage better. Then one is when I had read in one of a paper is what is called a pattern interrupt. Any pattern which is going on for a long time causes dullness. So, when you see that the children are getting dull, what do? You interrupt that pattern. You call their names, you show them a video, you have those chicken dance, okay, for 2 minutes, we'll do chicken dance, stand up and do chicken. So what you're doing is you're doing a pattern interrupt. A pattern interrupt is very important, because otherwise, in an online class, everybody gets dull and sleepy, right? Another thing which I read somewhere was what was called, I think, brain breaks, that, the brain needs breaks. So like keep giving brain breaks in between. Don't be only interested that, oh my God, I have to finish this syllabus. I have to finish this syllabus somehow. You will finish your syllabus, but the children will not have any learning. So give them brain breaks. Can be a puzzle for 2 minutes, can be a song from somebody, can be a joke from somebody. Give them brain breaks. Use a lot of these, badges, stickers, emojis, videos. That's I wish you can take help of some of these things.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Movement, pattern interrupt, and brain breaks are the key that ma'am has shared with us today. Next, we have a set of questions which are in line with each other, because we're talking about how educators can become better in supporting their children. So we have one question from Ms. Sumitra, who wants to know, certain teachers tend to have a very commanding personality, even with your voice and the way that they carry themselves. So that actually affects the rapport building with the students. So what can be done for people like that, ma'am? Do you have some tips?
Yes, surely training in communication. See, who wants, if you see what is the true meaning of power, when we have discussions with teachers, tell me, does true meaning of power mean controlling others, or does the true meaning of power means controlling ourselves? So when we observe such teachers, we call them, we don't criticize them, but we call them, we can give them training in communication. We can give them training in body language. that because, you don't come across like if suppose I am, fearful. So many times we develop these patterns from childhood. So what happens that suppose there's a child who is not heard at home. Okay. Now this child always had to shout to get, or always had to show power to get some things done. Now, when this child grows and becomes a teacher, the pattern continues, right? So we have to become aware. That is why I said an aware teacher is one who's aware of his patterns. So when we tell them that that's okay, it is nothing, we all have developed these behaviors. For some, like said, every behavior has a positive intention. That's one of the statements in neuro-linguistic programming. It is one of the presuppositions. So even as a teacher, if you feel that you're being rude, or you're being angry, or you're trying to be commanding, it would be very good if the teacher herself is aware of it and tries to change this pattern, because there was some reason when this pattern developed, but now I'm with children, I need to have a different pattern. So I'm sure awareness of the teacher herself, or in a school, we have a training program for teachers wherein we can teach them these communication skills.
Wonderful, ma'am. Awareness and practice is the key. On the similar lines, we have another question from the same spectrum, which comes from Ms. Farida, who wants to know, like, there are certain teachers who tend to be very polite in nature, and children tend to take them for granted and for a right. So what can be done in those cases? Is there any other specification?
In certain of these cases, classroom rules should be very clear. See, classroom polite does not mean that she will not be firm. Right? Politeness is a way of communicating, but you can be firm at the same time. Firm means that whenever, when a teacher starts a class, or when a teacher is introduced to a new set of students, she should make clear of what the classroom rules are. I always believe that classroom rules should be written somewhere in the classroom, so that every child is aware that whenever anything goes wrong, this is what is going to be the result. So then a teacher can be very polite and simply show that this is what this is the consequence. It is not, she doesn't need to say it with anger, she doesn't need to give punishment to the child. It is only that the child can be politely and tell him that I'm sorry, but you may have to sit at the back of the class because you're breaking a classroom rule. So she can be very polite but very firm at the same time. So I think it would be really helpful if every classroom has a set of classroom rules at the back of the class.
Having a structure would help in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Next, we have a question from Miss. I think the name is not mentioned. The device name is mentioned here. Let's take the question. The question is, how is that we can actually develop confidence in children, especially children in adolescent phases, because they go through a lot of things and their motivation tend to come down very easily. So how is that we can build and also sustain confidence in children?
Wonderful. So a very important thing here is that we should not compare children, because very often, what the biggest mistake we do is we compare children. Look what he's doing, look what he's, how much marks he's getting. So instead of that, we, encourage children to develop their own competence, to value hard work. So, we must talk about values. It's extremely important. See, here there's a beautiful explanation by Russ Harris, who had a beautiful course. And he explained this, that there is a difference between values and goals. Suppose my goals are to develop self-confidence. What are the values which I would live by every day, which would help me to attain my goal? So if I have to attain self-confidence and I start living by becoming a hard worker, that's a value. Now I am hardworking every day. What will happen? Gradually, my results will improve, my performance will improve in whichever area, not necessarily academics. If I'm hardworking at my singing, I'll have better performance at my singing. So, when we live by our values, certainly we will be able to attain our goals of getting self-confidence and becoming better individuals day by day. So I think value discussion is extremely important with children. What values are important to them, what values they live by. And that is the time, I think, children would really improve, because goal is something which is distant, right? Value you can live by every day.
Wonderful, ma'am. We are having a lot to learn from you and your session today. Next, we have a question from Ms. Jyoti, who would like to know like how sometimes teachers are very motivated to actually support children and actually facilitate their overall development. But what happens in a school setup, you have different pressures in terms of completing portions and pressure from co-workers who emphasize that if you're going to do this in a classroom, it will also put the pressure on us to do something similar and leads to a lot of other associated problems on those lines. So what can be done in such cases? Because this actually affects the morale of a teacher who's actually interested to facilitate holistic development of a child.
I'm sure if she has confidence in her own self and she wants to, she can be a source of inspiration for the others instead of, actually fearing what the others will say. See, I'll tell you one thing. This is one thing beautiful, which I learned. That suppose I have a self-concept. Just imagine, I know that I'm fit and I know that my weight is appropriate, right? Now somebody comes and tells me, oh my God, you're so obese. Will I actually get upset? I will not get upset because I have a self-concept which tells me my own self-image, in where I have a absolutely 100% confidence in my weight and my capacity. Okay. Similarly, if this teacher is confident that she's doing it for the benefit of the kids, she's doing it for helping the children, right? If she has this self-concept, why should she be fearful of anybody coming and saying anything? Rather, she can tell them, I'll also help you. I can help you, make your sessions, or I can help you in your work so that you can also improve and inspire and motivate children. No, I have to be basically have that sense of purpose and that meaning in what I am doing. If I know what I'm doing is correct, I will not be shaken by a lot of things, by what the others are saying.
Wonderful, ma'am. Next, we have questions from Miss Anna, Miss Deepa, and multiple others who want to know some children tend to misbehave and are very stubborn with what they want to do in a classroom setup, engage in anger manifestation, frustration, or shouting in the classroom. And like teachers do try a lot of different things to help the child and make the child understand how to behave and what is the appropriate thing to do. But what are certain things that teachers can do? Because it's very difficult for teachers also to stay positive throughout, because it tends to affect them at some point and it also gets overwhelming. So what can be done in such situations, ma'am?
Yes. So like I think in one of the questions I explained that, the behavior is just an outward manifestation of what they're feeling inside them. So if a child is irritated inside him, if he's feeling angry, it is going to come out in his behavior. So you see, we have to deal with the feelings before we deal with the behavior. If I'm simply, trying to correct behavior without dealing with the feelings underlying that behavior, it's just going to be a palliative that I'm just trying to, force him to shut up, to sit down. But if I understand that if he's getting angry, what is he feeling angry about? If I call him, if I talk to him, that I see that you're not feeling up to the mark. Can I help you in any way? Can I bring a smile to your face? So when I deal with the feelings, you will be better able to deal with behavior. The behavior will automatically improve when the child begins to feel better. So I always suggest that deal with the feeling first rather than dealing with behavior.
Thanks again, ma'am. Next, we have a question from Miss Mamta, who wants to know, like, sometimes children, at least from the smaller primary groups, they tend to have a gang or a group which they actually belong to, and they don't include other children. And they tend to make others feel isolated and not communicate with others. And sometimes in the higher grades, it also leads to other components of bullying, ragging, and things like that. So what can be done as teachers to actually motivate students to make them feel more inclusive? What can be done as a teacher?
I think the best way, one, is to tell them stories that nobody should be allowed to feel alone. How would that child feel? Compassion, empathy, give them examples, stories. Suppose you were left alone and no one was talking to you, what would you feel? Should we make the others feel hurt? Stories are beautiful ways because they help children to think in different ways. So when we see that this is a problem, find a story which is appropriate and then have a class discussion. Let various children come up with various things, that how we can help this child. Should we leave him to be alone? Should we leave him to feel hurt? Or should we be better human beings? Should we be more compassionate human beings? Should we be more empathic human beings? But we have to discuss, right? That is what value education, storytelling is about, because it teaches children the value of not actually not hurting the other. These are all beautiful values which can be taught by stories. And in the younger age group, specifically in the younger age group, stories literally lay new neurological networks in the brain, because they help us think in different ways. So all teachers, make use of stories, keep telling them stories. You see, in the earlier generations, the children used to hear a lot of stories from their grandparents. That formed a basis for their value systems. Whether it was helping, whether it was kindness, whether it was courtesy, we need to revive that process of storytelling in children, and that would help a great deal, I think.
Wonderful, ma'am. Storytelling role plays would actually help them learn concepts that would stay with them for a very long time. Next, let's take the last few questions. Next, we have a question from Ms. Millie, who wants to know that, is it okay as teachers for us to completely and blindly trust our students and take everything that they say at face value? Because sometimes there are certain students who tend to come and say certain stories to the teachers, because of which they are not able to complete a work, or because of which they are not able to perform. So is it okay for us as teachers to take them at face value? What are your thoughts on it, and where does the boundary lie?
Yes, a great question. See, I'm of the opinion, and this is my personal opinion, that distrusting them or trying to invade their privacy or questioning is in any case not going to help them. So if I trust a child, what do I convey to the child? I trust in you. And when I trust the child, what does the child say inside his mind? This teacher trusts me. I don't want to break her trust. That's how the child communicates inside in his mind. If a teacher distrusts, what will the child say? She never trusts me. I am going to be more skillful in how to get over her, how to make a fool out of her. So that is why it is always better to trust, much better to trust. And also, if you feel somewhere that the child is, not being truthful, why is the child fearing? Why is there so much fear in the child's mind? Does he fear ridicule? Does he fear judgment? Does he fear criticism? Is there some fear that he's not able to tell the truth? You see, if we want our children to be honest, we have to be ready to hear good truths as well as bitter truths. When we don't instill fear, when we don't criticize, when we don't ridicule, when we don't shame children, when we don't label children, they will become more open in telling us the truth. I hope that, answers your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this lovely insight. Let's take the last question for today, which would bring us to the other end of the spectrum. We've spoken mostly about the students here. One last question is in terms of parents, because as teacher, it also becomes very primary for us to actually connect with parents, communicate with them on a very consistent basis. So there are certain parents who don't understand their role. They feel that it is a responsibility of the teacher and the school to do everything for the child. So what are certain things that teachers can do to establish that sense of rapport with the parents, one, and make them understand the importance of their role in educating or facilitating the overall development of the child?
Yeah, great. So collaboration between teachers and parents is very important. Often I've seen teachers that, criticizing parents. So instead of criticizing, if teachers can understand that parents also are having a tough time, building trusting relationships with parents, right? Keeping lines of communication open, being even more empathic towards parents, that will really help. Because see, there's a homeschool connection. The child cannot do either without the home, without the school. So if this connection is good, I'm sure the overall development of the child is going to be much better, right? Instead of criticizing, instead of thinking that the parents are not taking part, you have to invite them, you have to communicate with them, make them a partner. Say you are a very important person in the life of your child. Tell them things about your child. This is how you can help your child, this is how you can help your child. And I always tell one very important thing, that happy parents have happy children. So for all parents, for all teachers here, your quality of life is the most important gift that you can give your children. So please see who you are. Anybody who doesn't walk his own talk, is going to be very difficult to teach what you yourself don't believe in. So go inside your own selves, become more aware of who you are, become more aware of your own, beliefs, thoughts, feelings, actions, where they are coming from. So try, as you as teachers and parents, when you improve, when you evolve, I'm sure your children will also evolve.
Wonderful, wonderful quote, ma'am. Children actually learn a lot through observation, especially observing their parents and teachers, and they actually inculcate a lot of values from there. Thank you for ending in this high note. I think this will be a lot of time for us to reflect upon on what we do, what we actually practice, and what we preach. I think it will be a lot of reflection for all of us to do. Thank you for such an insightful session. I've seen that the feedback link has already been shared with the members. I'd request my team members to again post the feedback link. Dear members, do let us know what your thoughts about the current session so that we can improve the experience for all of you. Ma'am, your final words to all our participants today.
Okay, that's great, Revati. So I want each and every teacher, each and every parent to believe that they are empowered human beings. Love is a very powerful force, and with love and feeling empowered inside you, you can literally change the world. Love, power, and wisdom, I think they are really important. So when every individual, is on the path of evolution, where every individual is becoming a better human being from where we are, we will all move towards mass consciousness. Everybody realizes that, they are an individual unit of consciousness. There is infinite possibilities where they can reach. They do not feel restricted by their present, wherever they are in the present moment. So I want all of you to, actually see that infinite possibilities are possible. Each of you are creators. Don't think of yourself as victims. Think of yourself as creators with unlimited potential. And I'm sure you'll do wonders to yourself, and self-care precedes other care. See the God and good in you. You'll be able to see the God and good in others.
What a wonderful note to end this session with. We're all touched, privileged, and pleasure to be here with you in the session today, ma'am. Thank you so much for all the lovely insights that you have shared with us. You enabled us to become better in this journey that we're all taking together. I would like to remind our participants once again that our upcoming workshops on the 12th of October is on what is an inclusive school and its benefit, which will be conducted by Ms. Mala Saraswati Nair. Followed by, we have another workshop on the 21st of October on setting up a student support service department in an inclusive school, conducted by Ms. Shivani Wadhwa and Mrs. Smita Tripathi. The timing for all of it would be 4 p.m. Indian time, 5:30 p.m. Indonesian time, 6:30 p.m. Singapore and Philippines time. The link for the same is being shared right now in the chat box. Do register yourself and book your slots today. And I would like to inform to all the participants that the certification would be shared with you all, and the recording and the presentation would all be reaching you all in few days' time. Until we see you for the next time, it's a big bye from Team Ability. Stay safe and take care, all of you.
Bye.